So we're right at 12. So I don't know if Dr. Johnson or Dr. Cooper, you want to introduce our speaker or?
I don't mind doing it. Hello, Jeff.
Hey, Keith, how are you, sir?
I'm doing fine. Doing fine. Yeah, I can introduce Jeff. So since we're right at noon, we can go ahead and get started. Jeff is he hasn't been here long, but he kind of has a dual role. He kind of works with the safety aspects of campus, as well as I think it's one of his official titles is Vice President for Administration here at ETSU. So right now he's currently housed over in the on the west side of the parking garage. I think that's where you are, aren't you there, Jeff?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
So yeah, so Jeff has been, having a huge impact on the campus. I know one of the things that I recently did as part of his leadership is that participated in kind of a virtual scenario training that police officers go through, which I thought was quite impactful, in that oftentimes the general public really don't know, the split decisions that officers have to make, which are, sometimes life or death. And so having that first experience kind of gave me a whole different perspective. And so all of that happened based on leadership that Jeff Blanton has been displaying. And of course, his leadership is shown throughout the campus, as well as safety and other areas here. So I won't go through kind of a whole litany of his accomplishments over the years, but he comes to us having worked with the FBI. So he has a lot of experience, especially when we start talking about free speech, hate speech and hate crime. So without further ado, take it away, Jeff.
All right, thank you, sir. That's a lot to live up to now, so I appreciate that. Well, as Kim and I were talking, this presentation is going to be a very amended snapshot of what we actually teach to police cadets at the Police Academy. We've done this presentation actually during Diversity Week at the university several years ago, and got a really good feedback from that. So hopefully we'll get some new ideas and some feedback here as well. The last time we did this, we were actually in person. So that makes a big difference. And I'd like to be as informal as we possibly can. So if anyone would like to say anything or add anything or do anything, you'll see as we go forward that there are some opportunities for interaction from the group, from the crowd, and keeping it as informal as possible. Please feel free to interrupt if you have a question or if you'd like to add something. I know there is a hand raising function. Don't worry about that. If you want to use it, feel free. But if you don't, just feel free to interrupt me as well. As Dr. Johnson said, one of my roles prior to coming here, I was with the FBI. And prior to retiring, I spent several years as the program coordinator for the Civil Rights branch of the FBI in the Eastern District of Tennessee. And in that role, I covered the hate crimes, civil rights, color of law, did some public corruption and other things. So that's kind of why we're here today. Dr. Johnson and I were speaking, and I kind of volunteered if we'd like to talk about some of these things. And so that's what brought us here today. And I really appreciate you having me. We will, like I said, this will be a very brief snapshot of some of the things we're talking about. So we'll jump right into it. I know we don't have a whole lot of time. So we'll start off just talking about, first of all, we'll go to free speech. We'll talk about hate speech, and then we'll get into some of the hate crimes and some of the things that we look at. And keep in mind, we're talking about here mainly what the roles and responsibilities are of law enforcement officers. So it's my hope that this presentation will allow us to have an understanding of what law enforcement's role is in investigating some of these crimes, and that you'll walk away with a better understanding of what the authority that law enforcement has and what the limitations are really when they have an opportunity to conduct some of these investigations. So let's start by just talking about what is free speech? Where do we get the authority to do some of these free speech investigations? So what is free speech? Somebody want to take a crack at that? And can it be offensive? We think about our speech and what we say and what we do. Can we offend people with our speech? Does it regulate it in what we say and what we think and the way we say it and present it to folks? And can it be in poor taste? Can our speech and our actions be in poor taste, either in a public setting or in a private setting, such as here on campus? And I know we've had a couple incidents here in not too distant past that may have been offensive and or in poor taste. And this is a big one because we get this a lot from students that reach out to
I know there's not much there.
So was there a question? I apologize. So is there a hate speech exception to the First Amendment? We get this a lot from students. We get this a lot when I was the program coordinator for the Civil Rights Unit here, about the hate speech exception to the First Amendment. And I've heard many attorneys actually even want to argue this. So we'll talk a little bit more about that too. And we'll talk about what the Supreme Court has said about this. So let's start at looking what the First Amendment actually says. And I'm not going to try to paraphrase this. We'll just, I don't want to beat you to death or death by PowerPoint or anything like that. But this is way too important to paraphrase. The First Amendment says that Congress shall make no law representing an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Well, that's pretty self-explanatory. Or abridging the freedom of speech or the press. Well, that again is pretty explanatory. We're not going to try to abridge any freedom of speech or press, or the right of people to peacefully assemble or to petition the government for redress of grievances. So there we have it. That pretty much is the First Amendment, and that's what we have to stay within whenever we get complaints as law enforcement against someone having their First Amendment right violated. That's the parameters that we stay within when it governs some of these hate crimes that we're going to talk about here in a few moments. So, hate speech, we just found out what it is. It's speech that attacks or insults a person, a group of people based on the national origin, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, or disability. That is hate speech. So, based upon what we just saw from the First Amendment, is that a crime? Can we do those things? Is hate speech a crime? Can we attack someone or insult someone based upon their protected, we call these protected characteristics?
I think we can. I don't think this is a violation of the law. That's what makes, I guess, in terms of the amendment, that's what makes it a struggle to determine exactly what constitutes protected speech, because I think people offend people all the time based on these classes that we have here. But at the same time, I don't think it's a violation of the law.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to weigh in on that? Anyone else have an opinion on that? Can we? And I appreciate you bringing that up. Thanks for that interaction. Can I attack you because I don't like you're Jewish and I don't like Jews, or you're American Indian and I don't like Indians? Can I attack you based just upon those characteristics, those protected characteristics? You have a disability. I don't like your disability. So the answer is yes, I can. So Dr. Johnson's exactly right. Without a true threat, those attacks are protected by the U.S. Constitution. Now, one of the examples that we always give, say, I hate Jews. I hate all Jews and I want to kill all Jews. I think they should all die. Well, that's a little bit different than me saying, I hate Jews and I'm going down to Main Street tomorrow morning and I'm going to blow up the mosque. I'm going to blow up the synagogue. That's completely different, because me having the ability to kill every Jew and hating all Jews and me saying I wish all Jews would die, that's a different scenario than me saying I hate all Jews and I want to go to Main Street. I'm going to Main Street tomorrow morning and I'm going to blow up the Jewish synagogue. Does everyone understand where I'm coming from with that? There's a difference in those two threats. I don't have the ability or the means to kill every Jewish person in the world, whereas me giving a specific threat, a specific place, and a specific means is completely different in those two approaches. So we'd have more of a true threat in one of those scenarios and a non-true threat in another scenario. Now, that doesn't mean that the person who makes that broad statement would not be on the radar and would not be assessed as a threat, but we would not be able to investigate that person specifically for a crime, if that makes sense to everyone. Any questions about that so far? All right.
So are you saying they have to, there has to be a statement of a specific intent?
Yes, ma'am. There has to be what's considered to be a true threat, and those true threats are extremely tenuous. And we're going to go through an example here, and before we're finished today, about how hard those true threats are to hash out. But there has to be an articulable true threat before we can say, yes, this goes from the realm of hate speech into true threat territory. But yes, we have to have an articulable true threat before we can say this is no longer a First Amendment protected speech into the realm of a true threat. I know that's probably a non-answer to your question so far, but let's look at some of the others and hopefully that will become a little bit more clear for you. So can we be offensive? Is this an offensive statement here? And I'll qualify some of the things we're going to talk about today. You'll probably recognize some of the people who have made some of these statements. I'm probably going to show you some pictures, and I'm probably going to show you some statements that will be offensive. And I'll apologize on the front end. There'll probably be some politicians or some political figures or people who are active in politics that you may recognize. I don't do that to take a stance either way. I'm just showing you some of these things that people have said because they are quite offensive. I pull these from some prominent people because this is very offensive. We don't want the word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population. That's a pretty offensive statement, right? But it's free speech. There's nothing that we can do. That's not a crime to say that. It was said by Margaret Sanger in 1939. White people deserve to die, and they know so, and they think it's us coming to do it. It's pretty offensive, right? Is it a crime to say that? So no, that's not a crime either. Louis Farrakhan at a promotional event in Milwaukee in August of 2016. So the Supreme Court has been very clear on this, dating back to 1929. Oliver Wendell Holmes, you can see here, freedom of thought that we hate is guaranteed. The government cannot punish or prohibit hate speech. The court has said the First Amendment is very broad, extremely broad. Then again in 2011, Chief Justice Roberts said that our national commitment to protecting hate speech in order to preserve a robust democratic dialogue. And that's something that I think, especially on a college campus or a university campus or in the setting that we're in, it's very important for us that we need to make sure that we're encouraging a very robust dialogue for everything we encounter. My background is in science, and we always encourage robust dialogue, but to try to disprove everything we were saying, to make sure that what we believed was right. You always wanted someone to disprove your theory or disprove your argument so that you could prove that it was right. And so I think that's one of the things that we have to stay engaged with and be mindful of, not just become lemmings for one side or the other. And the Supreme Court here has repeatedly rejected any government attempts to prohibit or punish free speech. Interesting side note, I was reading an article this morning, and some of you may have seen it. There were a group of speech therapists in Hong Kong who put out a publication to try to help some of their students, and it had the big bad wolf, and it had the Chinese government portrayed as the big bad wolf. And the government got wind of this and saw it and came in and captured all of those speech therapists, those teachers, put bags over their head, handcuffed them, and dragged them away. So we have to be very careful about any government attempt to prohibit or punish free speech. So we've talked a little bit about free speech, very quickly about free speech, but it's pretty clear looking at that First Amendment to our Constitution. Now let's talk about hate crimes. What exactly constitutes a hate crime? Are hate crimes, anybody want to take a crack? Are hate crimes special crimes any different from any other crime? Is there a special category, a special definition or category of a hate crime? Is it a special statute?
I think what separates a hate crime from normal crime is that the person committing it is doing so because of a prejudice of another individual's community that they appear to belong to.
Yeah. Did everyone? I don't know if everyone heard Abby. I think Abby read ahead. I think she cheated a little bit, so she's exactly right. The Uniform Crime Reporting, or the UCR, is what it's actually referred to commonly, is a reporting system which most police agencies across the nation subscribe to or report to, I should say. And this is a system of which the FBI actually uses to compile statistics to track crime trends, every crime you can think of. And the definition of a hate crime is pretty much any criminal offense that's motivated, as you can see here, by a bias, one of those protected classes that we talked about. It's not a different statute or a different special crime, but it's any criminal offense, basically. It's any of those kidnappings, rape, murders, assaults that, just as Abby said, is motivated by those protected classes or those protected elements, be it race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, ethnicity, gender identity. So that's what it is. Now, an interesting side note is the FBI got jurisdiction to investigate these in 1964. You may remember, I don't know if anyone saw Mississippi Burning. It was a movie, Medgar Evers, Mississippi Burning, 1964. Actually, I started my career in Chattanooga, and Anton DeLay Beckwith's wife, his widow at the time, lived on Signal Mountain, Tennessee. And I was driving on Signal Mountain one day and actually passed his house, and his widow was standing on the front porch, and she looked just as crazy in real life as she did in that movie. So they did a very good job portraying her in the movie as she looked in real life, but that's a side note. The FBI was asked to lead the investigation on Mississippi Burning. And Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy in June of '64 asked us to get involved with that. We did. And ultimately that led to the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So Congress passed the Civil Rights Act, and that gave the FBI primary jurisdiction and responsibility for investigating violations of civil rights-based crimes. And the hate crime statutes that we've talked about today fall underneath the civil rights crimes, or the civil rights unit of the FBI and the Department of Justice. So that's kind of where I'm going with this. And there are other definitions of hate crimes. Some states, some tribal jurisdictions may have a slightly different definition, but for the purposes today, when we talk about hate crimes, this is what we're talking about. It's any crime that's motivated by one of the protected classifications that we have here. And just so you'll know, currently, there are only 3 states that do not have hate crime statutes on the books. Those states are Arkansas, South Carolina, and Wyoming. And the main argument for these states saying that they don't have the statutes on the books is that they said they already have laws that protect or that involve hate crimes in some way or form. And their belief is that all crimes have a component of hate. And so that there's no reason to have a redundancy in enacting hate crime specific legislation. So that's the argument for them not having those hate crimes on the books. Tennessee does have a specific 3 main hate crime statutes. They have a criminalization quite similar to the FBI, and we'll talk about those a little bit more as we get specific into these. So we've talked about what a hate crime is. What is a hate incident? Abby made it clear for us that a hate crime is a traditional crime that's motivated by a bias against one of those protected characteristics. So you may want to take a stab at what a hate incident is. So if we know a hate crime is protected characteristic, and we know that hate speech is something that you can say and it's not illegal if there's no true threat, then the hate incident is pretty much like hateful speech. It's an incident that's hateful. It's hateful conduct, words, or acts, but there's no violation of law. So what do we mean by those? Well, it's some of that hateful protesting, the hateful picketing, the hand gestures, the signage we see around, as long as it's not on some of those private property and things of that nature. That's what we mean by hate incidents. We'll see the tattoos, we'll see some of the other things on people, the shirts, things of that nature. It's a hateful incident, memes, drawings, by conduct or words in which there's no violation of law. So it's all free speech. So with lack of a true threat, all those things are still protected, as Dr. Johnson told us initially, by the Constitution of the United States. Any questions about those so far? Because I know we talk to students about these a lot, and students have a hard time understanding the difference between an incident and a crime. I won't belabor these. These are some of the common statutes we use. There are a couple I want to dive into a little bit deeper. That's the Matthew Shepard James Byrd Hate Crime Act. You may be familiar with those, and the church arson statute. We won't dive too deep into the federally protected acts. And the civil rights conspiracy, basically the conspiracy is just 2 or more people conspiring to do something bad or something illegal. That's pretty self-explanatory, but let's look at a couple of these as we go forward and where they came from and how we apply them. The federally protected acts, my theory is we'll probably see a little bit more of these going forward because the Justice Department has become a little bit more aggressive in some of these. This basically says you have to act willfully. That's the intent of the law, intent of what you're doing. You have to use force or threat, and that threat or force has to be a true threat. It can't be merely what we talked about before. You can't just say words. You have to have the means, and you have to have a true threat to do those things. And you have to be acting because of one of those protected characteristics. So the elements we have to meet is we have to willfully be doing something. We have to use force or the threat of force. And we have to act because of protected characteristics. And then we have to violate one of the constitutionally protected rights. And these are some of the lists that we have that we can protect. You have to keep somebody from attending a public school, using a state facility, the right to employment, right to serve in court, the right to facilitate interstate transportation, or the right to use a public accommodation. And this is used oftentimes when people may be prohibited from exercising their voting rights. This may be used when people are not allowed to have access to specific school-sponsored programs, things of that nature. One of the interesting things I will point out is the right to use facility interstate transportation, and then the right to use a place of public accommodation. The interstate transportation clause is very interesting because the FBI gets its authority from the Interstate Commerce Clause. Well, this law kind of throws everything in there and says right to use any place of public accommodation. So it basically says, when you read the statute, that you can use the interstate commerce is not necessarily needed to fulfill the elements of this law. So it's interesting, kind of a nerd side point there, but this this law, I think, may be used more in the future. So we'll move on. Does anyone know, familiar with James Byrd, the James Byrd Matthew Shepard law? Yep, Dr. Johnson, you want to enlighten us on Mr. Byrd? Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, that's okay. Mr. Byrd was a gentleman, I think it was in Texas, where he was tied by these gentlemen and pulled behind a truck. And obviously just totally decapitated his body, in the process. So it was truly what most would consider to be a hate crime. He was targeted and suffered some major consequences of the acts that these gentlemen committed.
Yes, thank you, sir. That's exactly right. Dr. Johnson nailed it. I will expand just a little bit on that.
You can probably expand a whole lot on that. I just gave just the point.
No, that was great. That was great. You're exactly right. Mr. Byrd was in Texas. He was in Jasper, Texas. And this occurred not all that long ago. It was 1998, which to us is not a long time, right, Dr. Johnson? That's not too long ago. He accepted a ride from three gentlemen, and I use that term very loosely: Sean Berry, Lawrence Brewer, and John King. They offered him a ride, said they would take him home. He was walking down the road, but instead of taking him home, they took him to a remote area in the county there where Jasper, Texas was located. They severely beat him. And I apologize, I know you're eating lunch, but I'll give you a little bit more detail because this is an extremely heinous crime. And it led, as you'll see, to the Matthew Shepard James Byrd Hate Crime Act. And it's very important because I mentioned earlier the interstate commerce and the jurisdiction that we had, and there was no provision in some of these hate crimes laws for hate crimes based on gender, race, and sexual orientation, and so forth. So in assaulting Mr. Byrd, they did chain him by his ankles after they beat him severely. They dragged him for roughly 3 miles down the highway. And you can imagine what that would do when you're dragged down a roadway behind a pickup truck for 3 miles. Ultimately, he did succumb to his injuries. He was decapitated after being dragged down the highway. Parts of his body were recovered along the crime scene, along with a wrench that had the word Berry written on it. And there was another item, personal property found. It was a pocket knife with the word possum inscribed on it. Well, possum was the prison nickname for John King. So John King, Berry, and Brewer were all white supremacists that had actually done time in prison. And after they killed Mr. Byrd, they took his lifeless body and dumped it on the front steps of a predominantly Black church there in the Jasper, Texas area. And then after doing this to Mr. Byrd, all three went to a cookout there in Jasper, Texas. They were well-known white supremacists. They had tattoos on their body, Nazi symbols. They were Aryans, had Aryan pride tattooed on their body. They were well-known members of the Confederate Knights of America, other white extremist prison gangs that they were involved with. And within 24 hours after this occurred, the authorities in Jasper, Texas contacted the FBI. They got involved, and this was investigated as a hate crime. But as I said, there was no provision. The FBI did insist on this investigation, but there was no provision for a federal hate crime statute at that time that met this criteria. So what happened was Congress decided, and I will add that these three men had no remorse whatsoever. As a matter of fact, King expressed pride in the crime, and he actually wrote a letter from prison saying that regardless of the outcome, he made history and that death before dishonor. So these men were just completely, I hate to say worthless pieces of humanity about anybody, but that's pretty much what they were. So that was the James Byrd portion of the Matthew Shepard James Byrd Hate Crimes Act. So let's look at Matthew Shepard. Does anyone know who Matthew Shepard was? He also was in 1998. There has been, I think, well, it was 2020, I think, did a special on Matthew. Yeah, it was ABC's 2020 did a special on Matthew Shepard in 2004. But Matthew Shepard, around midnight in October of 1998, he was picked up by two gentlemen, Aaron McKinney and Russell Henderson. They met at a lounge in Laramie, Wyoming. And they told him that they would give him a ride home. So they befriended him. They gave him a short ride home to a rural area there in Wyoming. Mr. Shepard also was attacked. He was pistol whipped, robbed, and tortured. And then he was taken to an area off the road there after he had been robbed and tortured severely and tied to a post. He had been beaten so severely that some 18 hours later, a passing by a cyclist saw him and thought that he was a scarecrow hanging in the field. He had a fractured skull. I think his orbital was broken in his eye. He was in a coma and actually never recovered from the coma. So 6 days later, he actually succumbed to his injuries. He'd been stabbed so many times that the doctor said he just could not operate on him. He had severe brainstem damage, and he died as well. The girlfriend of one of the assailants said that the individuals who attacked him knew that he was homosexual, and that they decided that they were going to attack him for being homosexual, but they had also been buying drugs from him, and that also played a part into his attack, and that they had a homosexual relationship. That was Mr. McKinney, and his girlfriend is the one who said that they had that relationship. As I said, in 2004, ABC's 2020 did a expose on this. So that is the Matthew Shepard. Yes. I'm sorry, I thought there was a question. So that's the Matthew Shepard portion of the Matthew Shepard James Byrd Hate Crime Act. So Congress said that what they would do is we need to address these heinous crimes. Remember, they both occurred in 2008. So we need to simplify some sort of prosecution that can make these things happen. Because we didn't have a way to address those things that occurred based upon race, color, religion, or national origin. So part one says that any crime, specifically a hate crime, committing bodily injury or attempted bodily injury with a dangerous weapon because of actual or perceived race, color, religion, or national origin, that we don't have to prove there was an interstate nexus. Because we talked before that there was we had kind of had our hands tied sometimes in proving the interstate nexus to give the federal government the ability to prosecute some of these cases. Now, this law simplified prosecution of hate crimes involving those protected characteristics we just mentioned. And we did not need to prove bodily injury or attempted bodily injury with a dangerous weapon, which is another big plus for us. So that's the James Byrd portion of the Matthew Shepard James Byrd. Now, there's a word here I want to talk about, and it's perceived. So hate crimes committing bodily injury or attempted bodily injury with a dangerous weapon because of actual or perceived race, color, religion, or national origin. That perception, does anybody want to take a stab at it, whose perception that is? Is that the victim's perception, or is that the subject's perception? So if I'm the victim of a hate crime, do I perceive that you're committing a hate crime against me because of my race, color, religion, and national origin? Does that make you guilty of a hate crime? If I perceive you're attacking me because of one of those characteristics, does that make you guilty of a hate crime?
No, it would only make sense if it were that the person is doing it because they think that you are something, whether you actually are or not.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. I appreciate you bringing that up, because this is one of the, there again, we sometimes do this with students. And students will say, well, I'm the victim of a hate crime because I'm Cherokee Indian, and and I perceive that I'm being discriminated against or someone has committed a crime against me because of that. But you're exactly right. It has to be from the perception has to be from the subject's point of view. So thank you very much. So part two of this, the Matthew Shepard, James Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act deals with the Matthew Shepard side. And it basically is the same verbiage, except for it deals with sexual orientation, gender identity, and disability. And whereas before, with the James Byrd side, we don't need to prove the protected identity or interstate nexus. So we didn't have to prove that there was the protected identity or interstate nexus. Here, we don't need to prove protected identity, but we do need to prove interstate nexus. So we'll have to prove the interstate nexus on this side. So there again, it's that's just the way Congress wrote the law. So we'll have to prove the interstate nexus on this. And now that's a little bit in the weeds probably, but I want to bring that up because this is one of the more prevalent hate crimes that are used in prosecution of the hate crime statutes. So the one that's most commonly used and we've actually used here in East Tennessee during my tenure as the program coordinator more than any other has been the church arson statute. Now we call it the church arson statute, but you're not going to see the word fire used at all in the statute. What it says is it prohibits the defacing, damage, or destroying of religious real property because of race, ethnicity, color, religious character. And this also covers obstruction and true threats. So this makes it illegal to deface, damage any of those religious real properties because of the protected characteristics we've already discovered. Now, an interesting point here is there was actually a case that the FBI worked in which a Jewish synagogue had rented a hotel conference room. They took the Torah, they put it in their hotel conference room, they locked the doors, they came back the next day and their Torah was completely destroyed. They alerted the security for the hotel. They came, they pulled the camera, and they saw that the cleaning personnel came in, and one of the janitorial staff decided it was a good idea to completely destroy their Torah. Well, the person that did this, the janitor, was actually charged with this church arson statute, and it was upheld because the court said that by renting that place out, they had in essence made it part of their religious real property, and they had in essence also the Torah was religious real property, and they had destroyed that property. So this law applied to that. So we don't have to actually have a church building per se be destroyed or damaged. So we're not talking about real property as in real estate for the satisfaction of the statute. And we've actually also used it here in Johnson City when people have actually damaged and destroyed vans and so forth belonging to churches in this area. So just bring that one up. Anybody have any questions about these so far? I know this is kind of dry stuff, but these are the things that we have to work with when we talk about hate crimes and the things that we see here. All right. So based upon what we know so far, these are the Westboro Baptist Church folks, and they're standing outside of a shooting incident where someone was just shot and killed. Is this a federal hate crime? Can we stand outside of and picket where we're having a funeral for someone who was just shot and killed and hold these signs up? Is this illegal?
No, it's just sick.
Yes, thank you.
No.
You're right. No, this is not illegal. This is just sick. This is protected free speech. This is an Islamic center. Based upon what we know so far, I don't know if you can see this very well, but it says, you idol worshiper, go home, 9/11 equals murderer. Is this a hate crime based upon what we have discussed?
That's defacing of the church property or the Islamic Center property. So that would be a hate crime, wouldn't it?
Yes, you're exactly right. So this is religious real property that has been defaced. So this one, you're exactly right. This is the religious real property, which this would fall under the church arson statute. So as you see, we don't have to burn the church to satisfy that church arson statute. So I don't know if you can see this or not. This person obviously has Down syndrome, and it says, "Congratulations, you're retarded." Is this a hate crime? This is a meme someone posted on the internet. My little brother has Down syndrome, so I find this to be offensive. But is this a hate crime?
I think it's very offensive, but unfortunately,
I don't think it falls under hate crime.
Yeah, no, you're right. This is not a hate crime. And I think, Sharon, I think you asked about the true threat. So let's look at this one here. And can everyone see this well enough to read it? Okay, I'll give you a couple minutes to read this one. This was, while you're reading it, I'll give you the background of it. This is an actual letter that was placed in the mailbox of a church that was performing same-sex marriages.
Seems like it gets interesting when they say you have been warned. At that point, I'm saying it's a threat.
All right. Yeah. So does anybody, and I appreciate you bringing that up, Tracy, does anybody else want to take a stab at this and argue any other point? Does anybody
It
want to
also,
argue that?
it also says the above statement could happen to any church. And so there's maybe they deliberately put it that way so that it wouldn't cross the line.
Yeah, so from hearing you right, we have some qualifying language, could or should. I'm sorry, Chris, did you have something to add there?
I was just saying, like, the first part there, it says, shall surely be put to death. Is that part, once you get to the next parts of this, and it says you have been warned, I mean, couldn't it be perceived as a death threat?
It could, or can you argue that this is what's stated in Leviticus chapter 20, verse 13, and they're just reiterating biblical text?
Oh.
Yeah, that's kind of how I read it, that the first part is just kind of quoting and would probably be more of a incident or whatnot. But yeah, it does seem like by the end, it's more of a concrete threat. It's kind of like a bomb threat, like if someone had sent that in, I don't know, I'd have been worried. I would have seen it as more than just speech, I guess.
Yeah. So let me ask you this: if this was put in the mailbox of every church in town, would it change your opinion on, is this a true threat or is this a letter?
Since it mentions you have been warned churches, they're not signaling out a specific church. And so they're not making the threat more obvious, more pinpointed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And also it's not focused on any particular denomination. I think it's so broad that you're not really sure who the warning is for. Just church.
Well, how many churches though preform gay weddings? I mean, that would kind of narrow it down, right? I kind of agree, like where it's saying any pastor who does this is kind of like that thing where they don't have the means, really.
Yeah.
But since it's about, performing gay marriages specifically, I guess it would depend on the town and region, but yeah.
And didn't you
This would
say
be a
it was
hate
only,
incident, but not a crime?
Didn't you say it was only placed in the one church?
Yes, this was actually placed in a, this was placed, sent to a Presbyterian church regarding their performing of gay marriages. And I'm glad we're having, this is exactly what I wanted us to do here, because this is exactly what happened in real life. The way these investigations work is the church received the letter. They contacted local law enforcement. Local law enforcement then contacted their local FBI office because they were concerned about this being a hate crime, a federal hate crime. So the FBI supervisor gets this and has a conference with the United States Attorney's Office. The United States Attorney's Office does just what we do here. They go back and forth with the FBI supervisor. They're like, yeah, this is really close. It says should or could. It doesn't say I'm going to burn your church down. This could happen to you. This, should be burned to the ground, et cetera, et cetera. So the United States Attorney confers with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Unit. And the same thing happens with those two attorneys. They go back and forth and say, well, there's not a specific threat of this is going to happen this week or tomorrow, but because it was sent to this church and this church does do same-sex marriages. So long story even longer, out of an abundance of caution, a hate crimes investigation was opened because the letter was determined to be threatening enough to where a true threat could be extrapolated from the language. So Sharon, you were asking earlier, what makes a true threat? It's hard to tell sometimes what makes a true threat. And I wanted to show you this because it's not always as cut and dry as what we would think of hopefully a true threat would be. So this
would
is
it make it say surrounding counties had already had attacks on their churches and had received similar notices? Would that be like a compounding of evidence where it would automatically move into that? There wouldn't be a gray anymore. It would be a pattern of behavior.
Yes, ma'am. If we already had multiple attacks, then there'd be no doubt this would already be incorporated into one case. And at that point, there would already be a task force that would be working on this, and you would have multiple people working on that investigation already. Yes, ma'am. So, no, I appreciate everybody's involvement in that because this, as you can see, these things are not just cut and dry. And I was hoping that we would get that type of back and forth. So thank you very much. Any questions on this? Anybody else got anything to add? All right.
I do have one.
Yes, ma'am.
Out of curiosity, because I'm a linguist, I'm just wondering, the question of whether that constitutes a threat is entirely a semantic question related to Speech Act. And I'm wondering if linguists are ever asked what they think. I mean, when it matters, not after the fact, but when it matters.
That's a great question. We do not. We do employ linguists for some of these investigations because this is extremely truncated, this whole presentation. But the Civil Rights Unit also has a hand-in-hand investigative process with the Domestic Terrorism Unit. And so when we open a domestic terrorism investigation that we think may have a nexus to a civil rights, i.e., let's say, the Christian Identity Movement or the Black Separatist Movement or one of those organizations that target specific groups and their ideology is nothing but terrorism, then the domestic terrorism side of the house and the civil rights side of the house will work hand in hand. And in working those, we may have to have a translator, especially if you're talking to someone who speaks Arabic or you're talking to someone who speaks Farsi or Urdu or some of the other plethora of languages. And so we will onboard a linguist early on in that investigation to see what's being said and the dialect and how things are used. We don't necessarily do that with English, but we will oftentimes bring on a behavioral scientist. because the behavioral science unit is extremely important in using to see what's going on behind the scenes, maybe in sentence structure, or if we've seen this before, maybe this letter has been used other places or by someone else. It's all caps, for example, so the shouting and things like that. So we do incorporate a ton of different units. And I just didn't say that because there's so much other stuff going on in the background. But yes, ma'am, we do bring on other people, but not necessarily linguists if it's a language that we know, but we would most probably bring on a behavioral scientist to help try to decipher, if that answers your question.
That's very interesting. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So anything else? All right, we'll look at another easy one. Is this offensive? Yeah, if you're a Christian, this is very offensive. If Jesus returns, kill him again. You've got a picture of cross being tossed in a trash can. But is that a federal hate crime? No, of course not. So, and I know we're getting close to the end here, and I just wanted to kind of hit you with some stats from the UCR that we talked about. And in 2018, and stats can be kind of boring, but I just kind of wanted to show you what the trend is so far. There were 59.6 race, ethnicity based motivated stats. And you can see what the other ones were. So there were 7,036 single bias incidents. And what that means is it's defined as an incident in which one or more offense types are motivated by the same bias. So there's just a single bias. And then in 2019, there were 7,103. So it's approximately a 1% increase from 2018.
Is that in the
So
country?
Pardon me?
Is that national?
Yes, ma'am. This is national. This comes from the Uniform Crime Reporting Statistics, which are maintained by the Criminal Justice Information System in West Virginia. And not every law enforcement agency across the nation submits to these. It's submitted to by approximately 15,588 or so law enforcement agencies. That was how many submitted in 2019. So the 2019 data is the most accurate that we have, or the most recent we have on file. The 2020 data will not be available until the end of the year. So we've had approximately 1% increase, as you can see, from 7,103 in 19 and 7,036 in 18. So a little bit of an increase. There were 59.6 were race related in 18 and 57.6 were race related in 19. So there's been a 2% drop in race related between the 2 years. So, we're on the right track. Oops, sorry. I didn't mean to do that. I closed our screen out on us. Sorry about that. But the thing I want to tell you is the state of Tennessee is on the right track. Overall, the numbers in the state of Tennessee from 2018 to 2019 increased by about 36%. So Tennessee is on the right track and doing well. So that's the second most is sexual orientation and then religious bias. And of those religious bias crimes, the majority of those were aimed at Jewish religion. So that's all I have. I appreciate your time. Does anybody have any questions about anything we've covered today? I know some of it got kind of dry, especially we talked about those laws, but I just kind of wanted you to see what we have to work with. A lot of people think, well, this is obviously a race crime, or this is a hate crime, or this is sexually motivated or gender motivated or one of those protected identities. But oftentimes we just can't make the case, or we can't pursue some of those investigations because our hands truly are tied by some of the elements that we have to meet to do those investigations. It doesn't mean we won't do an assessment to see if there is. We can meet the elements, but oftentimes we just can't meet those elements because the willfulness of some of those oftentimes too is very hard to prove. Any questions so far? Yes, sir.
So if it's not a crime, if it's more of an incident, yet it's so hateful and just what is the response if it's not a law enforcement response? Is it just something that's put under surveillance? Is there another department or something that can step in that can address it in some way?
When you say so hateful, can you give me an example of?
Well, like that church, that last letter that we talked about, maybe, or one of those other examples you showed, like the Westboro Baptist group, for instance, that they're right on that line between, protected free speech and it being an actual crime, yet it's determined not to be a crime, yet it's still very concerning. So I guess I'm just wondering what are strategies to respond to that? That could very easily become a threat.
Yes. So no, we cannot maintain surveillance or records or tags or member lists or anything on those people that are not violating the law. Westboro Baptist Church, for example, you can go right now on the internet and pull up their website, listen to their sermons. They have a blog, I think. They have all kind of stuff out there currently. So
well, that just makes me think that that's like the role of education, really, and like for us to use our voices to counter that, I guess.
Yes, and I think you're exactly right. And we're a civil society. I think starts with all of us. At home, with our family, our friends, our children. Education, teaching people right from wrong, because there is a lot of bad. I mean, I don't mean to be cliche. There's a lot of bad stuff going on out there for people to listen to and get into and learn from. And it's easy to go down that rabbit hole and get hooked up with the wrong people. We've all seen it.
Yeah, and what we do also as the Office of Equity and Inclusion, we're more about education. So the goal is we don't get to that point, so we have a lot of programming from the conference that we have to what you have today, Lunch and Learn. But oftentimes what you find is that, especially like today, for an example, the things that we're talking about, this is like you all are like the choir members, right? You have an interest, but you are not the ones who will go out and have these signs and that sort of thing and form these threats anyway. So oftentimes the people who really need to hear this are the people who are not going to participate. But hopefully as an institution, we can have enough outlets and resources that through curriculum infusion, which we're working on in our ETSU 1020 courses, with all the other orientation that we have, with Amy Johnson in the teaching and learning excellence, with the Lunch and Learns we're doing now, newsletters, just all the kinds of things that we're doing, inclusive excellence trainings that we're doing for faculty and staff, having diversity, educators, et cetera. Collectively, I think we can make a significant difference, because oftentimes I really believe that the squeaky wheel or the squeaky wheels, if you will, is not as many as those who are on the screen who's trying to make a significant difference. And I think we can outnumber with good things that we do. And so my goal as VP for Equity and Inclusion is to make sure that I provide everyone with resources and opportunities to be equipped to be able to address in advance the things. So we work more in a preventative kind of environment than we are in terms of how do we respond to the aftermath.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I appreciate you bringing it up, Keith, because I think that is exactly right. We have to be, especially to some of the kids, because they get so much bad information, I think, by talking to people who just don't know the truth. So I appreciate what y'all do.
Thank you. Well, I think Kim put in the chat, you're going to get some information so that you can provide us your feedback for this Lunch and Learn. This is really helpful as a philosophical thing. Not that anything is bad, but we can always get better. So we want your feedback so that we can know how to get more people involved, get people more engaged, And so your feedback is extremely valuable to us. So don't hesitate about completing that. I want to thank Jeff for this very informative. Jeff, no, it was not boring. We have to know the statistics. That's a part of it. We can't just dismiss it and kind of go with all the glitter and shine. We have to have that. So thank you for including that into your presentation. I've learned a lot, though I've been, reading and been in the inclusive excellence world for a long time. Every time I hear presentations like the one that you just provided, I still learn a lot. So keep doing it. Keep doing it. Don't stop. And again, I thank everyone else for joining in on today. This have been recorded, and so it will be made available on the Equity and Inclusion website. So please feel free, if you want to share this with someone else in your college, your department, your division, et cetera, please feel free to